He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
I feel like I'm watching my children, and I'm like, and when one of them moves away from the rest, I'm like, oh, someone's fighting. Like you see them, they are quite mobile. It's pretty exciting to get to. Well, I think it's exciting. Everyone else probably thinks it's like watching grass grow, but yeah.
Kia ora, nau mai haere mai ki te ao horihanga. Ko Ellen Rikers tēnei. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World. This week we're visiting Lake Rototoa. It's northwest of Auckland City near the entrance to Kaipara Harbour, and it's one of the most special lakes in the region. It's nestled in remnant dune forest and fringed by raupo and sedge, and it's the last refuge for some rare and endangered species. Among them is the Kākahi, the native freshwater mussel. It has a fascinating but complicated life cycle, and it's a key part of the lake's ecosystem because it filters the water. These shellfish once blanketed the lake bed, but now they're coming under pressure from all sides. It's a scorching hot day in late summer when I join a team from Auckland Council trying to protect and restore the lake's last Kākahi.
Right now the water is probably quite warm, 22.
Wow, that's pretty balmy.
Yeah, we've actually got continuous water quality sensors in the enclosure that give updates on pH, dissolved oxygen, electrical conductivity and temperature every 15 minutes.
Wow.
And a camera that's got a live feed so you can watch the mussels 24 hours a day.
That's Abi Hussein. He's a Kākahi expert and diver, and he's preparing to check up on a special enclosure created to give the Kākahi a safe space to breed. Until a few years ago, everyone assumed that the Kākahi in Lake Rototoa were doing all right. There certainly seemed to be plenty of them around. Alongside a water quality monitoring program, Abby had been diving to get an idea of just what was happening under the water.
And we started seeing mussels, and at first we were like, oh yeah, this is great. You could see shells scattered all over the place and fairly high densities. So the assumption was that the mussel beds were still in good health. And then we went into a quantitative survey following that initial qualitative assessment. And that's when we started to see that the densities of live mussels were really low.
Quantitative versus qualitative, that's like actually going in and counting the live ones.
Yeah. It's very hard to tell them apart just at a glance because they die closed, but a lot of them that are live are also closed and lie on the sediment. So it's not like they are, like marine mussels all aggregate on rock and then when they die they fall. So these, if you're swimming over a bed, you could look at this and see hundreds of mussels and think it's all good. But when you actually start counting, and then we started measuring them, and that's when we realized that there's been no recruitment because all of the size classes were adult size classes. So I don't think we found a single mussel, live mussel here that was smaller than 51 mil, and majority of them were 61 to 70 and then 70 mil plus. So all mature adults that haven't really spawned, or had they spawned, it wasn't successful recruitment.
So, I mean, what was your reaction to sort of looking closer and realizing?
Yeah, it was scary, and it kind of spurred a whole lot of work out of that because we then started looking for other lakes in the region where there were historic records of mussels, so we went and resurveyed those. So Lake Tamarata is the only other lake where we found reasonable numbers of live individuals. Still, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a thriving population. And then we've probably been to 11 or 12 other lakes. So I think we've been through 17 lakes across the region, which are the 17 biggest natural lakes. And only 2 have live freshwater mussels. It's this one in Lake Tamarata.
It's pretty shocking, really.
Yeah. And that's not because they weren't there before. So some of the lakes we found historic mussel beds, so there's shell hash buried. So Lake Pupuki is a good example where it's a lake that everyone knows. It's on the North Shore. I don't think a lot of people know that once had hundreds and hundreds of freshwater mussels. They're just buried under about 15 centimeters of sediment. But once you clear that, we've mapped out beds that were 20 by 50 meters squared with really high densities.
The Kākahi in Lake Rototoa are a species called Menziesii, and across Aotearoa they're declining. There are 2 other Kākahi species in New Zealand, and they're even rarer. All 3 have been affected by big changes to their freshwater habitat, things like contaminants, changes in water levels and water flow, and the spread of invasive plants and animals. In Lake Rototoa, the water quality is pretty good, but the lake is teeming with pest fish, and in particular, a fish called perch pose a real problem for Kākahi. We'll come back to exactly why that is later on.
We've done quite a bit of research on how we could look at removing perch from this lake, and we've kind of come to the conclusion that we just don't have the tools right now to do that. So then we started looking at from another perspective, like can we protect the mussels from the perch, because mussels are such an integral part of the health of the lake because they're filtering it all the time.
That's Belinda Stadom. She's a biosecurity advisor at Auckland Council for Fresh Water. So if you can't get rid of perch completely, how do you protect the kākahi? Well, you use a net. Not to catch the fish, but rather to keep them out. Think of it like the underwater version of a predator-proof fence. Madison Jones, a senior healthy water specialist at Auckland Council, explains.
If I had to sell it to a 6-year-old, we've put a net in the lake and created a little healthy lake. So we called it the Goldilocks zone when we first did this project because we looked across the whole lake to decide where we want to put these. So we found where we thought it had the best substrate, the best habitat, and we put the net there to try and find the best spot for the best chance of survival.
Today, I'm joining Belinda and Madison out on the water in a dinghy. The divers, Abby and Andrew, will be checking up on the kākahi to see whether they have successfully spawned inside their special enclosure. But first, we're paddling over to an older, smaller enclosure, now decommissioned. The team want to see whether they can find any young kākahi buried in the mud.
Yeah, so we're going to the first ever enclosure that we've now decommissioned. And so what we're doing is, because it worked so well the first time, that's fair to say, huh, Belinda? We are taking some sediment cores to see if the Kākahi, the baby mussels, are within the sediment in the old enclosure. Just so, almost like proof of concept, understanding that they're managing to survive post the life cycle phase, which is what the main point of the enclosure is.
Right, so the enclosure is to enable spawning to happen, and so that's happened, and now you're just seeing how those little babies are doing?
Yeah, so it's been in for a few years. So we did a really small one. It was only 1 metre by 1 metre, just as a proof of concept. And so we've now installed that big enclosure there, which is a lot larger and doing on a far bigger scale. And if that all goes well this year, maybe we'll do an even larger one. We've got these. Very scientific. Belinda cut up some pipe. And we'll just chuck end caps on. So we'll just push it into the sediment, put a little end cap on, and then the suction will bring up that sediment intact. So what it would look like from 1 metre to 5 or 10 metres.
Right.
And then
got someone who's going to sift through it all and see if she can find any of the juvenile kākahi.
While the divers are busy fishing for mud with bits of pipe, it's time to learn a bit more about the strange and complicated life cycle of kākahi. Step 1, spawning.
So essentially what happens is the male will put out, I don't know if I'm allowed to say.
See why not?
Who listens to it? The male put their sperm out into the water. So,
Okay, yeah.
and the females take in all of that.
So there are male and female kākahi.
Yeah.
Do they look different? Or no, can't tell.
Not on the outside, no.
Step 2, the females brood their fertilised eggs in a little pouch until they develop into teeny tiny baby mussel larvae. These larvae, which start out as small as 1/3 the size of a grain of salt, are called glochidia, or glocks for short. On to step 3.
The females release those glochidia into the water, and then they need a host species in order to live, so they need to be able to attach onto a native fish and grow on the native fish for a while.
The next step is an odd but important one. The kākahi use little hooks to latch on to a type of native fish called a bully to hitch a ride for a few weeks.
When they're on the fish, they're very easy to see. They look like a microscopic mussel, so they have the mussel shape even on the fish, but they glow, so they almost have like a pearly glow to them. So it doesn't look like a cyst or something. It looks far more eye-catching because it catches the light. But they are tiny.
And how many might there be on one fish?
I think the most I counted last time was in the 20s. Like it basically had taken over the whole fish.
Wow.
Probably not that great for the fish when it's that much, but yeah, they can really take over. And I guess it's how close the fish are to the mussels for how many are going to attach. But they can attach or insist, so that's when the tissue kind of grows over them and they're really stuck on there. So I've never seen that many encysted, but definitely attached to them.
And how long do they stick onto the fish?
We think about 3 weeks. They then fall off and they live amongst the sediment for a few years. I say that with big question marks. And even where, like, obviously we've got them enclosed into this area, so they have to stay and fall off where, you know, we've got them safe and protected. But in a natural environment, they're at the bullies' mercy of where bullies are going, right? So, or other native fish. So we don't even know where they are dropping off. And then, yeah, they live amongst there for a while, and then they emerge when they're, what, like that big? How big is that?
Pea-sized?
Yeah, a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chickpea-sized?
Yeah, perfect.
Kākahi start breeding at around 4 years of age, and they can live as long as 50 or even 60 years. But the stage of life where they're squirreled away, buried under the mud, smaller than chickpeas, that's still a big mystery. And we have lots of questions about it, like how deep do they bury themselves? How long do they stay buried, and how many survive? The Auckland Council team are hoping that the mud samples in this old enclosure will contain some of those mysterious buried mini mussels. But they won't be sifting through them today. That's a job for someone with a microscope. Still, the divers surface with some interesting news about the aquatic plants and algae, the charophytes and macrophytes.
So the whole thing is just full with charophytes and pondweeds at about 1/2 meter tall. So, and it's quite noticeable versus outside the enclosure. Like, there's definitely a bit of macrophyte region in there.
Yeah.
Which in itself is
It's cool. Yeah.
That's quite interesting because tench are not even herbivorous. But they feed by sort of disturbing the sediment. So we've got a number of pest fish in here: tench, perch, and koi carp, and gambusia. So perch are a real problem for the Kākahi, but yeah, tench are obviously, just because of the way they feed, they sort of disturb all the bottom, so it stops the native underwater plants from establishing.
Right. So the enclosure, because it...
Yeah, because it excluded them, the underwater plants have flourished in there.
Wow.
Which is cool.
Yeah. That's pretty neat.
accidental benefit.
Yeah.
I think it also probably reiterates the impact tench will be having, because if charophytes are able to grow back when it's excluded, then it shows that, because, you know, we think the Glochidia are living definitely within the first couple centimetres. If seeds can't even grow and plants can't even grow because they're disturbing it that much, then Kākahi will be taken out too.
Yeah.
Typical that they're the most complex lifestyle that we're trying to protect, because there's so many different impacts at all the different stages, so it really is like trying to manage everything.
So the tench are causing trouble for the Kākahi, but one of the biggest culprits is the pesky perch.
We think the perch are Glochidia sinks. So last year there was definitely Glochidia attached to a perch that we caught within the net, because one of the baby perch was small enough to sneak into the net mesh and then grow in there.
Sneaky.
I know. So although that was very sneaky, it was lucky because it was another sign that what we're doing is helping, because there's lots of different ways that, you know, the pest species are really impacting that.
So when you
life
say
cycle.
they're like a sink, what do you mean? Like they're attaching and then just not dropping off, or like?
Well, because perch, our native bullies, they love sunbathing and being in the shallows, whereas the perch are going to go off and go down to the depths. So they're going to take them to a place that the native fish likely wouldn't have taken them to. So they're literally like a sink, as in it's going to the bottom of the
I
sink.
see.
Yeah.
And can they not survive down there as well, or?
We don't know.
Okay.
But the other side of it is we thought that the perch had eaten all the bullies, had reduced the number of bullies so that there was no Kākahi bully interaction. But we've actually since caught a lot of bullies, but we think they're not hanging out in the same place. So when there were good Kākahi beds in the lake, the Kākahi formed structure in the lake that the bullies would like sitting on, so they were constantly on, together, like they were a species that were living together. But the perch have changed that because perch are predatory and they're eating bullies. We think, this is our theory, that they've forced the bullies into the reeds because they're hiding from the perch, and because of that the bullies and the Kākahi are not interacting, so the bullies are not on top of the mussel bed any longer to collect the spawn and continue the life cycle of the Kākahi, because there's no juvenile Kākahi in this lake. Like, they're all adults and they're all, we think, quite old, and so there's no recruitment happening.
Beyond the invasive fish like tench and perch, there's climate change. In one Northland lake, Cyclone Gabrielle sent a cascade of pine needles into the water, which blanketed a healthy Kākahi bed. The pine needles had to be removed to save the Kākahi from being smothered. Here at Lake Rototoa, there are no pines on the lakeside, but we can see dead trees that have slipped.
A lot of kānaka all came down. I think the cyclone came barrelling in here right across Lake Rototoa.
A lot of slips and trees down across the whole lake.
And so that impacted the Kākahi.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they've also found that it's impacting the plants because wherever the plants were growing, obviously that sediment came down in a massive influx and just smothered them. So those massive weather events, unfortunately, do have quite an impact. And I think back in the day, like, you know, pre-human times, when big weather events would happen, the lake had a lot more buffer potential because it didn't have other impacts. But when there's so many different things happening at once, it's, you know, 1,000 cuts.
With all the mud samples fished up, we head over to the newest and biggest enclosure. Here, Kākahi from across the lake have been translocated into a dense community. Spawning has begun, and now the team are using traps to collect live bullies so they can check up on that hitchhiking stage of the Kākahi life cycle.
So if you see on their little fins, you can see those tiny little white
It's like a bit of
spots.
dust. Yeah.
It's easier when we have a cup, but if I isolate him a bit, can you see? Right on those top fins. There. Tiny little dots. Those are the baby mussels.
Oh my gosh.
So I can't even...
That's
I'm so
awesome.
excited. Because, I mean, it's starting now.
So we've got sort of like a plastic Tupperware container, and it's got about 8-ish.
Yep.
8 little brown, speckly, almost golden coloured fish. And they do have kind of big eyes, I'd say. Very cute.
Do you reckon they look like fish versions of bulldogs?
Is
Sometimes
that
I
why
see
they're named?
No, I don't think that's why they're called bullies. That's just what I think they look like pugs, or, you know, because they're quite, they're cute, ugly, you know. Often the glochidia are right at the top.
And on there's one there that's got its on the tail.
They're not covered in them, but this would mean that the spawning's probably just started, and next time we come out there'll be a lot more. But yeah, so you can see on that fish there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on him, so that's exciting. And there's some on this one here, on his bottom tail there, just at the bottom. So what we do now is we pull them out and we count them.
Yeah.
So we usually catch about, I'd say, 100 fish each time, and we'll count exactly how many glochidia are on them before we release them back into the enclosure, so that when the glochidia do drop off, they're safe and protected. So the reason why we count them is so down the line, when we start to hopefully get some juvenile mussels, which would be the next exciting thing to see, we know roughly how many glochidia we had versus the baby mussels that we are hoping we eventually get.
Do the fish get annoyed, do you think?
You wonder whether it's itchy for them or something. I don't know. They, how would you know?
Yeah, I'm going to say probably, because it is parasitic, you know, so it probably isn't their favourite thing, but I like to think that they're protected from everything else in here, so
They can put up with
they
those.
can, it's like them paying rent almost.
Madison will collect around 100 bullies from this enclosure. Then she'll go through each one by one, taking note of the size of the fish and counting how many glochidia are attached. Then they're released back into the enclosure. One of the divers hands Madison a precious adult Kākahi to show me.
So this is the Kākahi. So you can kind of see the colours that I was talking about.
Yeah, it's quite iridescent, sort of bronzy gold. And you've got a bit of green, is that sort of algal growth on it?
Yeah, but they do
green.
sometimes have a little bit of a green tinge anyway.
Yeah.
When they're really small, they're see-through, so they're golden. And then as they age in size, they start getting this darker colour. So when they are really little, you can see like a golden shine across them.
Below us, on the silty lake bottom, there are lots of these Kākahi popping out of the sand like mini shark fins.
So they look like a little half shell popping out the water. and then you can see their little inhalant siphon and their little exhalant siphon. And that's actually what you can really see is like the fringed siphon, and they have a smooth siphon. And that's what you see actually popping out the water, and then they filter like that. So
Right, okay.
But they've got a muscular foot, haven't they, that they can extrude to sort of move themselves around, so they can move themselves up and down in the sediment. And
When you say a foot, what does it look like?
it has
I
no
reckon it
toes.
looks like a tongue.
Yeah, it looks like a tongue.
Think of a human
Yeah.
tongue moving it around.
Yeah.
Spooky.
Freaky. And yeah, when you see them kind of all buried in, it's really cool because you can see how hard they're working to filter, which is amazing in a lake where it's, you know, not terribly impacted like this. But when you see them in really impacted and damaged waters, you can see them exuding a lot of pseudofeces. So there's so much pollution in the water that they're having to work so hard that it'd be like eating celery for us constantly, right? We're not getting enough calories versus chewing. And so in poor water quality, you can see that happening. But thankfully for us in our muscle cam, we can see that they're filtering away pretty happily. So not too much coming out of them, just the right amount.
Right. So when you said pseudo-feces?
Yeah, so it's like, imagine a mixture of like sediment and like globby looking, like if you dissolve peanut butter in water. That's almost what it looks like.
Okay.
It's quite nasty looking, so thankfully ours aren't doing that. They're pretty happy.
Yeah.
And I also think they're happy because we've got them in a high density, which is, you know, what they'd normally be in, so they're keeping the water quality good for each other at the same time, because they, at their height of filtering, will filter a litre an hour. So if you think about the lake bed being completely surrounded with them, you know, they'd be filtering smaller lakes in a matter of days when they're in high enough densities. So because we have them in that little enclosure in quite high numbers, they're keeping that water clarity quite clear, which is great for our viewing.
Inside the enclosure, the shellfish are packed in close together. It's like a bustling metropolis of Kākahi and native fish, reflecting how they would have lived across the entire lake when the population was thriving. But now, outside the net, the Kākahi are pretty sparse, a bit like lone wolves. The enclosure is now home to the healthiest Kākahi bed in the whole lake. And that's scary, Madison says.
Because of the life cycle and needing to rely on the host fish, there's so many points in the different life of Kākahi that they can get impacted. So they could not attach at all. They could be releasing those glochidia and there's no fish around, which is what we know is happening across this lake, because Belinda and I have done pretty heavy trapping and have checked bullies near and around Kākahi beds where they used to be alive, and we've never once found even one single glochidia attached to a fish outside of their enclosure in this lake.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's heartbreaking, but I guess emphasises why this work is important. And then if they do manage to successfully attach, then the pest fish thing comes in, where they're getting either disturbed in the sediment or eaten when they're really small. So, you know, that's happening as well. So there's lots impacting them. So lots of little stages that we need to protect. And even then, you know, I'm super hopeful for this project, but there's a lot more to do, right? This is a pretty small enclosure in comparison to the size of this lake. So although it's so exciting that it's worked, I think there's a lot of work ahead of us to be able to upscale this to make the difference that we really hope to.
The Kākahi enclosures are just one part of a holistic project that's looking at the whole ecosystem of Lake Rototoa. Belinda has had some success controlling a freshwater weed called hornwort that can be spread via tiny fragments.
We put so much effort in to pests on land. Like, it's just accepted that we control rats and we control possums, which is so important. And I think we need to start putting the same amount of effort into our water resources. And I think the reason why people don't is just they can't see it, right? So even under our own eyes, the Kākahi have, you know, had massive extinction events that we haven't been aware of. Like, we've lost them from so many lakes and we had no idea. And to find out that they're already gone before we even knew they were there, and that's pretty heartbreaking. If people knew how beautiful it was, like if you could put your head underneath Lake Rototoa and see the beautiful plants and understand what a unique ecosystem it is, I genuinely believe people will care the same way they do when they walk around the Waitakere. It's harder to connect with because it's underwater.
Thank you to Madison Jones, Belinda Stadholm and Liz Kirschberg from Auckland Council. Thank you also to Ebi Hussein from Submerged Environmental and Andrew Simpson from Global Dive. Some good news that came through after my day out on Lake Rototoa. Those mud samples fished up from the bottom of the lake, they did indeed have baby mussels buried inside them. This is further evidence that those exclusion nets are doing their job and helping to keep kākahis safe through all steps of their life cycle. If you'd like to learn more about how those pests like perch actually ended up in the lake in the first place, the RNZ podcast Black Sheep has the story. The episode is called Invasive, the Story of Stuart Smith, and you can find it at rnz.co.nz/blacksheep. This episode was produced by me, Ellen Rikers, with help from presenter and producer Claire Concannon, and RNZ podcast producer Liz Garton. Sound engineering was by Phil Benge. Tina koe e whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week. Kia pai te wiki.